Today, Saturday 13th, is for me personally a bitter and upsetting day. I know it's a bitterness and distress that's shared by many people. The news that has precipitated this is the confirmation of the death of Gonzalo Lira in a Ukrainian prison or hospital. I'm not quite sure which. Now, Gonzalo and I have knew each other for a fair amount of time. We began contacts actually before the latest iteration of the Ukrainian conflict began. We did programs together. I appeared on his shows, and of course he joined us many times on the Duran. He was an exuberant, vital, exceptionally clever, remarkable man, and he's someone that I developed very real feelings of affection for. In earlier programs, I have spoken of him as a friend, and that is what he was. That doesn't mean that he and I always saw eye to eye on everything. It's also the case that he could be emotional and could sometimes say things which were perhaps went further than was wise and perhaps even he intended. But as I've said many times, the fact that people have passion, emotion, it just means ultimately that they're vibrant personalities. And in Gonzalo's case, I actually have to say this, I think a heroic one, because he remained in Ukraine. He did so, and I know there's been a huge amount of speculation as to why he chose to remain in Ukraine, but the explanation is very simple. Gonzalo did not want it to be widely disclosed and talked about. He was, in fact, a private man. But anyway, the explanation was very simple. His two children were in Ukraine, aged 10 and 7. There was immense difficulties arranging to have them brought out of Ukraine, and as a father, he wanted to be close to them as possible. And as a father myself, I absolutely understand those feelings. Now, a person in his position who chose to stay in the Ukraine might have decided to lie low, but that was never Gonzalo's nature. He saw the situation in Ukraine. He was deeply distressed by the situation in Ukraine, and he felt a moral obligation to speak out about it. And he did. And he did that exercising his right as an American citizen under the First Amendment of the Constitution to report his thoughts and set out his opinions, and he did that on an American platform, principally, that platform being, of course, YouTube. Now, I have singled out all of this, the fact that he was an American citizen, that he was exercising the rights American citizens have of free speech, and that he was doing it on an American-owned platform, which was YouTube, because again, there's been a huge amount of debate and discussion about why Gonzalo spoke out in the way that he did. He spoke out in the way that he did because he loved Ukraine, and I think this is a point very few people seem to understand, but he loved Ukraine. He had his family there, he had his children there. He traveled extensively around the country. He knew the people. He liked the people. He was deeply distressed about what was happening in Ukraine itself. He loved Ukraine. He was very upset and very angry about some of the things that were happening in Ukraine, and also about the policies followed by Western governments. And he felt that it was his moral duty to speak out, and he felt that it was his right as an American citizen to speak out and to do so, as I said, on an American platform, which is YouTube. Well, the sequel, everyone now knows. He was arrested. He was arrested twice, by the way. On the second occasion, he was held in detention. He basically disappeared from view. It was very, very difficult establishing contact with him. Eventually, that is to say, we at the Duran, contacted by his father, and that provided us with a, well, short last few days, a kind of indirect line of communication with Gonzalo. As people also know, he was released briefly from prison. He spoke about the extraordinary mistreatment that he faced in prison. He spoke about his increasingly grave medical conditions. He tried to leave Ukraine and to enter Hungary, but he was unsuccessful. He said that if that failed, if he was not able to leave Ukraine and enter Hungary, he faced a real prospect of dying in detention, and I'm afraid, tragically, that is what has now happened. Now, there's an awful lot more that can be said, but I will say a few things. Firstly, I feel I've lost a friend. This has been extremely distressing for me personally. It's also distressing for Alex Christoforou, my colleague, who had actually more contacts with Gonzalo than I did. I feel deeply distraught by this news, and I'm afraid it is probably going to make my work a little less coherent, at least for a couple of days, as I try to get over this experience. I should also say that part of that distress extends not just to Gonzalo himself, to the terrible ordeal he went through, culminating in his death, but also, of course, for his family, his two young children, who I am sure will remember him with love and pride as the heroic individual that he was. Beyond that, however, I will express a certain sense of anger. Gonzalo, as I said, was an American citizen. He was expressing opinions, in English, by the way, on an American platform, which was YouTube. He was arrested for doing so by the Ukrainian authorities. I have discussed the case that was brought against him. It never made any kind of sense to me at all, and notice that at no point in time was it ever properly prosecuted. There has never been, to my knowledge, a proper hearing in a Ukrainian court where the issues in his case have been fully argued out. Certainly, there has never been anything remotely like a trial. So, he was held in detention in Ukraine for, as I said, talking in English, principally to people in the United States, as an American citizen. He had a lawyer selected for the court, by the court for him. I'm not, by the way, in any way denying the ability of this lawyer. Everything I've heard about him suggests that he did everything that he could on Gonzalo's behalf. He was given very limited contact with the outside world. He was barely able to communicate with his family. And his descriptions of his treatment in prison, despite his known health conditions, were of a sort that I am not going to describe. Now, I can't help but feel that his own government, the United States government, whose duty it is to protect the citizens of the United States, essentially abandoned him. The enormous influence the United States has in Ukraine is hardly a topic a controversial topic. Everybody acknowledges it. The American government might not have been happy with some of the things Gonzalo was saying, but again, let me reiterate, all he was doing was exercising his constitutional right as an American citizen of free speech, safeguarded by the First Amendment of the Constitution. The case that was brought against him made no sense at all, and he had well-known health conditions, and there were, shall we say, very strong grounds to be concerned about his mistreatment. Everything that I know about this case points to the American government having failed to take the steps that were needed to get Gonzalo to a safe place, to extend to him the protection of the United States, which would have been decisive. Now, others have attempted to intervene on his behalf. We at the Duran attempted it to the limited extent that we can. Others, like Elon Musk, for example, contacted people in Washington. I understand Rand Paul and others, Ron Paul perhaps also, spoke out on his behalf. His case was brought up by Congress people in Washington, and yet a wall of indifference, or at least silence, a stony silence in response to all of this from the State Department. And I should say from the part of many people in Congress as well. And the media in the United States, so powerful as it is, the fourth estate, as it sometimes calls itself, well, basically they said nothing about him. I mean, I believe there were the odd pieces here and there, but you can't find anything substantial about him. The contrast with the attention that other prisoners in similar circumstances, the attention they receive from the American media when the American media feels engaged in their cases and in their causes, could not be more stark. Now, to me, that is a terrible statement about the politics, the situation today in the United States. The government owes the same duty to all its citizens. It shouldn't pick and choose which citizens it works to protect. Some governments, of course, do, but that is not what one expects from the government of the United States. The same applies to the media as well. One would expect that the media, which after all, its rights too are protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, it would be particularly concerned about action being taken against an American citizen exercising his First Amendment rights. Apparently not. Now, as I said, I feel angry. There's a lot more I can say about this. I'm not going to do so. I don't like to express myself in unduly emotional terms, so I'm not going to do that further. One last thing I'm going to say before I move on to the topics of this program is that I have been inundated by messages from people, some including many people I know, about Gonzalo. I should say that I am frankly too emotionally involved at the moment to be able to respond to them. I am generally distressed by this affair, but I have received comfort from the fact that all of these people have been writing, and I know that his family are receiving that same comfort as well. He may have been abandoned by his government, but he was not abandoned by many, many others. Anyway, that is all I will say about Gonzalo, except to say that I hope that now he rests in peace.